My name is Esther Gill, 32 years old. To my family, I'm a failed IT worker, the black sheep. But to the U.S. Department of Justice, I'm a digital criminal's worst nightmare. The feeling of being strangled by your own brother isn't like the movies. It isn't dramatic. It's wet. It reeks of expensive scotch and desperation. When Julian tightened that Hermes leather belt around my neck in my server room, he leaned close to my ear and hissed, "Die in silence, you bitch." He thought I was a dying lamb. He checked his Rolex, counting the seconds until I stopped breathing. He laughed, wiping his sweat, believing that stepfather Frank's money would clean up this body just like every other mess. But Julian made a fatal mistake. He didn't know that the room he was standing in wasn't a home office. It was a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. And he had just filmed the evidence of his own crime in 4K resolution. Thank you so much for being here with Quiet Power Stories. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, your country and city, in the comments. We'd love to know. Please note that this story includes some fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarities are purely coincidental, but the message is one worth reflecting on. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday when I pulled my beat-up Subaru into the driveway of the guest cottage. Greenwich, Connecticut was silent. It was that heavy, expensive kind of silence you only find in neighborhoods where the hedges are trimmed with laser precision and the neighbors communicate through lawyers. The main mansion, where Frank and my mother lived, loomed on the hill like a dark fortress. But my little cottage at the edge of the property was supposed to be my sanctuary. I had just come off an 18-hour shift at the DOJ field office. My eyes were burning. All I wanted was a hot shower and the anonymity of sleep. But as I reached for the front doorknob, my stomach dropped. It was unlocked. I never leave it unlocked. Paranoia isn't a disorder when it's your job description. I pushed the door open with my elbow, my hand instinctively hovering near my waistband, though I wasn't carrying my service weapon tonight. Then, the smell hit me. It wasn't the smell of a burglar, it was the smell of entitlement. Tom Ford oud wood mixed with the acrid stench of stale scotch. It was a scent that had dominated every Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas morning of my adult life. "Julian," I whispered, the dread pooling in my gut. I walked into the living room. It was a disaster zone. Cushions were slashed, books pulled from the shelves. I heard a crash from the back room, my office. My heart hammered against my ribs. That room was strictly off-limits. I ran to the doorway. Julian was there, standing amidst the humming black towers of my server racks. He looked manic. His Brooks Brothers shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sweat glistening on his forehead. He was ripping cables out of a hard drive array, looking for a safe that didn't exist. "Where is it, Esther?" He spun around, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "Where does the old man hide the emergency cash? I know you have a stash here." "Julian, get out," I said, my voice steady, though my knees were shaking. "There's no cash here, you know that. Don't lie to me." He kicked one of the server towers. The metal dented with a sickening crunch. That rack alone was worth more than his car. "I need 50 grand by morning, Esther. The guys at the club, they aren't like Frank. They'll break my legs." "Gambling again." I stepped forward, trying to block his path to the main terminal. "Go home, Julian. Tell Frank, I'm not giving you anything." He laughed, a cruel, jagged sound. He stepped closer, looming over me. He was 6'2", a former Yale rower, built on protein shakes and arrogance. I was 5'5" of exhaustion. "You think you can tell me what to do?" He sneered, looking down at me with that familiar look of absolute disgust. "Look at this place. All these blinking lights. You think you're so smart, don't you? But you're just a glorified mechanic. You're just the help, Esther. You fix computers. You reboot Windows for a living. You are nothing." He reached for the main console. "Maybe I'll take this. Pawn it for parts." "Don't touch that," I snapped, grabbing his wrist. That was the trigger. The golden sun didn't like being touched by the help. He backhanded me. The force sent me spinning into the corner of the desk. I tasted copper. Before I could orient myself, he was on me. He didn't punch me again. That would leave bruises on his knuckles. Instead, I heard the distinct swish of leather sliding through loops. He unbuckled his belt. An orange Hermes belt with a gold H buckle. "You always were too loud," he muttered, wrapping the leather around his fists. He lunged. The leather loop dropped over my head before I could scramble away. He yanked it tight. The world instantly narrowed to a pinpoint. My windpipe was crushed against the stiff leather. I clawed at the belt, my fingernails scratching uselessly against the expensive grain. I looked up into his eyes. There was no hesitation, no brotherly love, just cold, annoyed calculation. "Die in silence, you bitch," he whispered. I tried to kick, but my body was going limp. My lungs were burning, screaming for oxygen that wouldn't come. I heard a sickening pop, cartilage in my throat giving way. The humming of the servers faded into a high-pitched ring. My vision went gray, then black. The last thing I felt was him checking his watch. I don't know how long I was out. Maybe a minute, maybe less. The first thing I registered was the pain. It felt like my neck was filled with broken glass. I gasped, a ragged, wet sound that tore through the room. I was lying on the anti-static floor mats. The room was empty. The door was ajar. Julian was gone. He thought he'd finished the job, or maybe he got spooked. My phone was 5 feet away on the floor. The screen was cracked. The instinct of a normal civilian would be to crawl to that phone and dial 911, to scream for help, to cry. But I didn't cry. I didn't reach for the phone. I rolled onto my stomach, my vision swimming. Every inch of movement sent shockwaves of agony down my spine. I dragged myself across the floor, gripping the edge of the desk to pull myself up. My fingers trembled, hovering over the keyboard. I wasn't an IT support girl. I was a senior forensic analyst, and I knew something Julian didn't. The camera system in this room wasn't recording to a cloud that could be deleted. It was a closed-circuit loop, buffering to the RAM. If the power cut, or if the loop overrode itself, the evidence would be gone forever. I had to lock it. I coughed, blood spattering on the enter key. With shaking hands, I bypassed the GUI and opened the command line. I typed in the sequence I had memorized for catastrophic scenarios. SHA 256, checksum, lock file, mirror to DOJ vault. I typed the 32-character encryption key. My vision blurred, but my muscle memory didn't fail. Click. Upload complete, chain of custody initiated. Only then did I let myself slide back down to the floor. I touched my neck. It was swelling rapidly. I looked at the screen. The file was safe. Julian wasn't just my brother anymore. He was Subject 0. And I had just signed his warrant. The pain in my neck was throbbing, a rhythmic drumbeat syncing with the adrenaline fading from my blood. I sat on the cold anti-static floor of my server room, staring at the progress bar on the screen. Chain of custody initiated. As I waited, my mind didn't stay in the present. Pain has a funny way of digging up old ghosts. It dragged me back 2 years, to a place that smelled not of blood and ozone, but of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and old money. It was Thanksgiving at the Greenwich Country Club. If you've never been to a country club Thanksgiving in Connecticut, imagine a room full of people who hate each other, pretending to be a family for 3 hours while wearing sweaters that cost more than my first car. The dining hall was cavernous, lit by crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than a public school's annual budget. I was sitting at the far end of the table, the kids' end, even though I was 30 years old. Frank, my stepfather, sat at the head, holding court. He looked like the quintessential patriarch. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, a glass of 18-year-old Macallan in his hand, his face flushed with the self-satisfaction of a man who owns everything he looks at. "And this," Frank boomed, clapping a heavy hand on Julian's shoulder, "is the future. Yale Law, top of his class. Just got an offer from Cravath." The guests, a mix of Frank's business partners and local politicians, oohed and ahed. They raised their glasses to Julian. Julian sat there, soaking it in, swirling his wine with that arrogant smirk I knew so well. He wasn't top of his class. Frank had donated a new library wing to ensure Julian didn't flunk out. But facts didn't matter in Greenwich. Only the narrative mattered. Then, a woman with too much Botox and a diamond necklace the size of a golf ball turned her gaze toward me. "And what about you, dear?" she asked, her voice dripping with polite disinterest. "What do you do?" I opened my mouth to speak. I wanted to say, "I work for the Department of Justice. I track human traffickers and cyber terrorists." But Frank cut in before I could make a sound. "Esther?" He laughed, a dismissive, airy sound. "Esther is our little techie. She fixes computers. You know, if your printer jams or your Wi-Fi acts up, she's the one to call. She's finding her way. She fixes computers." The table chuckled. I forced a smile, taking a sip of water to wash down the bile rising in my throat. I wasn't a person to them. I was a utility. I was the help. That dynamic wasn't new. It was the foundation of our entire family architecture. In Frank's ledger, children were classified into two columns: assets and liabilities, investments and expenses. Julian was the investment. I remember his 18th birthday clearly. We were standing in the circular driveway. Frank led him outside, eyes twinkling, and presented him with a brand new BMW M4 convertible. Midnight blue. "A man needs a machine that commands respect," Frank had said, tossing him the keys. My 18th birthday was different. I didn't get a car. I got a lecture. Frank sat me down in his mahogany-paneled study. "Esther," he said, looking over his reading glasses, "I'm not paying for your college. Handing you money would cripple your character. You need to learn the value of $1. You need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps." So while Julian crashed his BMW twice and had Frank's lawyers make the DUIs disappear, I was filling out FAFSA forms. While Julian spent his summers on a yacht in the Mediterranean, I was working double shifts at a data center to pay off my student loans. I drowned in debt while living in a mansion, a paradox that only the stepchild of a billionaire could understand. But the moment that really defined us, the moment that paved the way for tonight, happened just 6 months ago. I was in the living room of the main house, sitting on the sofa with my laptop. I was running a diagnostic on a DOJ secure line, but to the naked eye, I just looked like I was browsing the web. Out of habit, I had a small piece of black electrical tape over my webcam. Frank walked in, pouring himself his third drink of the evening. He stopped behind me, peering over my shoulder. He saw the tape. He snorted, the ice cubes clinking in his glass. "What is that?" He pointed a manicured finger at the tape. "Are you worried someone is spying on you?" "It's just standard security, Frank," I muttered, not looking up. He started laughing. It wasn't a joyful laugh, it was mocking, deep from his chest. "You are so paranoid, Esther. Who do you think you are? You think the CIA is watching you? You think you're important enough for anyone to care about?" He leaned down, his breath smelling of expensive alcohol, and whispered, "Newsflash, sweetheart. Nobody watches the help. You have no value. You are invisible." He walked away, chuckling to himself, leaving me burning with humiliation on the plush leather sofa. If you have ever felt invisible in your own home, or if your parents clearly had a favorite, please hit the like button and comment, "I see you" below. Let's show the world that we are not invisible. I blinked, the memory dissolving back into the reality of my server room. The pain in my neck flared again. Frank was right. I was invisible. To him, to Julian, to my mother, I was just a background character, a cost to be minimized, a failure who fixed printers. But as I looked at the screen, watching the encryption lock into place, a cold smile touched my lips. Frank didn't realize that invisibility is a spy's greatest weapon. Because he thought I was worthless, he never asked what I really did. Because he thought I was paranoid, he never questioned the server racks in the guest cottage. Because he thought I was just the help, he never realized that the person washing his dishes knew how to bury a digital footprint or expose a hidden offshore account. He thought I was a liability. He had no idea that I was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. The upload bar hit 100%. Transfer complete. I closed the laptop. The IT girl was gone. The agent was awake, and she was ready to work. Most people assume my office is a beige cubicle with a motivational cat poster and a potted plant dying under fluorescent lights. They imagine I spend my days resetting passwords for baby boomers who forgot to turn off their caps lock. The reality is a windowless bunker, 3 stories beneath the Department of Justice headquarters in Washington, D.C. The air down here is recycled, kept at a constant 65 degrees to protect the machinery. It smells of ozone and stale coffee. There is no cell service. There is no sunlight. There is only the hum of the cooling fans and the glow of 60-inch monitors displaying the darkest corners of the human experience. 2 weeks before the incident with Julian, I was sitting in the tank, our secure conference room. On the main screen was a grainy video feed intercepted from a server in Yemen. It showed an American aid worker kneeling in the sand, a masked man standing behind him with a serrated knife. The room was crowded with brass. 2 generals from the Pentagon, a CIA liaison, and my boss, Assistant Director Miller. The tension was thick enough to choke on. "We have a lock on the location based on the background topography," one of the generals said, his voice tight. "A Reaper drone is in position. We have a 10-minute window to strike the compound before they move him. We need a go, no-go on the video's authenticity." All eyes turned to me. I wasn't Esther the stepdaughter. I wasn't the IT girl. I was Agent Gill, Senior Forensic Analyst. I zoomed in on the hostage's left eye. I slowed the frame rate down to 120 frames per second. My fingers flew across the keyboard, running a spectral analysis on the lighting artifacts. To the naked eye, the video was terrifyingly real. The hostage was crying. The wind was blowing the sand. "Gill!" The CIA liaison pressed, checking his watch. "We are burning daylight. Is it real?" "Wait," I said. My voice was low, authoritative. It didn't tremble. I isolated the shadow cast by the hostage's nose. I cross-referenced it with the solar angle for that specific latitude in Yemen at this time of day. "The shadow vector is off by 3 degrees, I said, pointing at the screen. "And look at the pulse in his neck. I'm running a blood flow algorithm. The pixel coloration changes don't match a human heart rate. It's a loop." "Are you sure?" The general leaned forward, his knuckles white on the table. "If we don't strike, and this is real, that man dies." I looked up. I looked the general dead in the eye. "It's a deep fake, General, generated by a GAN algorithm. If you drop that bomb, you're hitting an empty building, or worse, a building full of civilians they want you to kill for propaganda. The hostage isn't there." The room went silent. The CIA liaison looked at Miller. "Director, she's betting a lot on a shadow." Miller didn't even blink. He crossed his arms. "If Gill says it's a fake, it's a fake. Stand down, General. Abort the strike." 10 minutes later, intelligence confirmed it. The hostage had been moved 2 days prior. The building was a trap rigged with explosives. I had just saved the lives of a drone operator's conscience and a dozen innocent civilians. Miller walked by my desk later that night as I was packing up. He didn't offer praise. We didn't do praise down here, but he nodded. "Good catch, Gill. Go home. Get some sleep." "Yes, sir." That was the life I lived. Respected, essential, powerful. But then came the hardest part of my day. The transition. I took the elevator up to the parking garage. I sat in my beat-up Subaru and took a deep breath. I took off my DOJ lanyard and hid it in the glove compartment. I took off the sharp, tailored blazer I wore for meetings and pulled on a shapeless, oversized cardigan. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror and consciously softened my eyes. I practiced slumping my shoulders, erasing the confidence, erasing the agent. I had to become Esther again. The drive to Greenwich usually took an hour, but mentally it was a journey between 2 different dimensions. I often thought about telling them. I fantasized about slamming my badge onto the mahogany dining table and watching Frank's jaw drop. But then I remembered the brunch. It was a Sunday, 6 months ago. The Sunday brunch was a sacred ritual for my mother. We were sitting on the patio of the country club, shielding our eyes from the sun, drinking bottomless mimosas. I had just received the Director's Award for Excellence at work. I was bursting with it. I wanted my mother to know that her daughter wasn't a failure. "Mom," I started, nervously fingering the stem of my glass. "I actually have some news about work. I led a project last week that..." Shh, look at that, my mother interrupted, pointing at the television mounted above the outdoor bar. The news was showing a press conference with a female FBI agent who had just taken down a cartel ring. The woman looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun. My mother shuddered, taking a delicate sip of her orange juice and champagne. Look at her, she looks dreadful. So hard, so masculine. She turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were soft, pitying, and utterly suffocating. I am so glad you didn't go into anything dangerous like that, Esther, she said, reaching out to pat my hand. I know you wanted to study criminology back in college, but honestly, it's for the best. I felt my chest tighten. Why do you say that, Mom? Oh, honey, she laughed lightly, as if stating the weather. You have such a nervous disposition. You're so fragile. You always have been. You couldn't handle the pressure of real work like that. You'd break in a day. She squeezed my hand. It's good you stick to computers. It's safe. It's simple. Just like you. I looked at her. I thought about the drone strike. I thought about the human traffickers I'd tracked through the dark web. I thought about the dead bodies I'd seen in crime scene photos without flinching. Fragile. I swallowed the truth along with the rest of my mimosa. It burned going down. You're right, Mom, I said, my voice quiet, small, obedient. I'm lucky to have a simple job. That was the moment I decided they would never know. Their ignorance wasn't just a shield for me, it was the only way I could tolerate them. If they knew who I was, they would have to admit they had been wrong about me for 30 years. And people like Frank and my mother don't admit mistakes. They just rewrite history. So, I let them have their version of Esther. The invisible girl. The disappointment. But as I lay on the floor of my server room, watching the chain of custody upload complete, I realized that the double life was over. The fragile girl had just died on this floor. And the woman who stood up, wiping the blood from her lip, was the one who decided when the drone struck. Waking up didn't feel like rising from sleep. It felt like being dragged underwater. The first thing I registered was the sound. The rhythmic, monotonous beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor. The second was the smell. Antiseptic, floor wax, and the vague metallic scent of filtered air. I tried to turn my head, but I couldn't. My neck was encased in a rigid foam collar. The panic hit me instantly. A sharp, cold spike of adrenaline. I gasped, but the air wouldn't go down smoothly. My throat felt like it had been scrubbed with steel wool. Easy, easy now, a male voice said from the corner of the room. I blinked my eyes open. The harsh fluorescent lights stung. Standing at the foot of my bed wasn't a doctor. It was Officer Miller. I knew Miller. He had a 14 handicap and played with Frank every Saturday morning at the club. He was currently leaning against the wall, chewing a piece of gum with a slow, bovine rhythm, looking more bored than concerned. You took a nasty spill, Esther, Miller said, closing his notebook. Docs say you have, what was it? Laryngeal edema, swelling of the throat. I tried to speak, but only a croak came out. I pointed at my neck. Miller waved a dismissive hand. Yeah. Listen, I already took a statement from Frank. He told me about the dispute, said you and Julian got into a little argument over some borrowed money. Things got heated, you slipped and fell into some equipment. He looked at me, his eyes flat. Unfortunate accident. Family stuff gets messy, right? I stared at him. The rage that flared in my chest was hot enough to burn through the sedation. Slipped and fell? I had hash marks from a Hermes belt burned into my skin. It wasn't, I rasped, the words feeling like razor blades. He strangled. Miller stepped closer, lowering his voice. Now, Esther, let's not use heavy words like that. Julian is weeks away from the bar exam. You don't want to ruin the kid's life over a misunderstanding. Frank is very worried about you. He wants to make sure this is handled quietly. No need to involve the press or make this a criminal matter. There it was. The Greenwich Way. Protect the golden sun. Bury the daughter. I was about to tear my IV out and strangle him with the tubing when the door flew open. Get out! The voice was sharp, commanding, and beautiful. Officer Miller turned around. "Excuse me, I'm conducting a police interview. You are harassing a victim in critical condition without counsel present," the woman said, stepping into the room. She was wearing a charcoal pencil skirt and a blazer that looked like armor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes were blazing. "Elena, my cousin. Or rather, my second cousin on my father's side, the side Frank liked to pretend didn't exist. She was an assistant district attorney in Manhattan, and she was the only person in my bloodline who didn't care about Frank Gill's money." "Elena," Miller shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just getting the facts." "I know exactly what you're doing, Miller," Elena snapped, walking past him to stand by my bed. "I saw your squad car parked next to Frank's Mercedes outside. You aren't here for the facts. You're here for damage control. Now, get out before I call your captain and file a complaint for obstruction of justice." Miller hesitated, looked at me, then at Elena. He knew he was outgunned. He capped his pen. "I'll be outside if she wants to make a formal statement." He slipped out, closing the door behind him. The moment he was gone, Elena's posture softened. She dropped her bag on the chair and grabbed my hand. Her fingers were warm. "Oh, Essie," she whispered, using the nickname only she remembered. "Look at you." I squeezed her hand. I needed to talk. I needed to act. "Water," I wheezed. She quickly poured a cup and held the straw to my lips. The cool liquid soothed the fire in my throat, but swallowing was agony. "Frank called me," Elena said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "He said you had a breakdown and hurt yourself. He wanted me to come talk some sense into you regarding legal action. He wants you to sign an NDA." I closed my eyes. Of course he did. "Elena," I whispered. "My bag. The EMTs brought it. It's right here." She reached under the bed and pulled out the clear plastic bag labeled "Patient Belongings." Inside were my clothes, my wallet, and my keys. "Open it," I said. "Hidden pocket, inside the jacket." Elena frowned, but did as I asked. She unzipped the bloody hoodie I'd been wearing. Inside the lining, there was a small, hidden seam. Her fingers brushed against something hard. She pulled out a silver USB drive. It looked ordinary, but it was military-grade hardware, encrypted with a 256-bit key. "What is this?" she asked. I took a breath, preparing myself for the pain of speaking. "Frank thinks I'm IT support. He thinks I fix printers." "I know, Essie. We all know they treat you like crap." "No." I locked eyes with her. "They don't know. I don't fix printers, Elena. I work for the DOJ. Cyber Crimes Division. Senior Analyst." Elena froze. She stared at me, processing the information. The black sheep cousin, the failure, the quiet girl. "This isn't a domestic dispute," I forced the words out, each one a victory. "This was an assassination attempt on a federal agent." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the heart monitor speeding up, matching my pulse. "The drive," I pointed. "Watch it. The password is Justice 32. Elena didn't ask questions. That was why I loved her. She was a prosecutor. She operated on evidence. She pulled a slim laptop from her briefcase, booted it up, and plugged in the drive. I watched her face as she typed in the password. I saw the moment the video started playing. I saw the reflection of the screen in her glasses, the 4K footage of the server room. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. She watched Julian storm in. She watched him smash my equipment. She watched him scream at me. And then, she watched him unbuckle his belt. I turned my head away. I couldn't watch it again. I just listened to the audio coming from her laptop speakers, the sickening crack of the cartilage, the sound of Julian grunting with effort. And then, that whisper, clear as day. "Die in silence, you bitch." Elena slammed the laptop shut. When she turned to look at me, she was crying. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated fury. Her jaw was set so hard I thought her teeth might crack. "He checked his watch," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He checked his watch while he was killing you." Frank, we'll try to bury this, I said. Elena stood up. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at the door where Officer Miller had stood, then back at me. The sadness was gone. The assistant district attorney was back, and she looked ready to burn the whole world down. Let them try, Elena said, her voice low and dangerous. They think they're dealing with a scared little sister and a family dispute. They have no idea they just handed me a smoking gun. She pocketed the USB drive. Rest, Esther. Save your voice, she commanded, smoothing the blanket over my shoulder. I'm not leaving this room, and when Frank walks through that door with his checkbook, he's going to wish he had stayed at the golf course. Elena didn't want to leave. She stood by the door like a guard dog, her hand on the latch, staring down the hallway. They're here, she said, her voice tight. Frank brought his personal lawyer, but the hospital staff wouldn't let him past the nurse's station. It's just Frank and your mother. Let them in, Elena, I whispered. My throat felt like it was filled with ground glass, but my mind was razor sharp. Elena hesitated. I can stay. I should stay as your counsel. No. I shook my head slowly, wincing as the neck brace dug into my jaw. They won't talk if you're here. They won't show their hand. I need to know what they're offering. Elena looked at me for a long moment, realizing that I wasn't asking as a victim, but as an investigator gathering intel. She nodded once, squeezed my hand, and stepped out. A moment later, the door opened. The air in the room changed instantly. The sterile smell of the hospital was overpowered by the scent of heavy perfume and expensive aftershave. My mother walked in first. She was wearing a vintage Chanel tweed suit, pristine and white. A ridiculous choice for a hospital visit, but perfect for a country club luncheon. Her face was pale, her makeup flawless, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, which she slowly removed. Frank followed. He was wearing his deal-closing suit, navy blue, pinstriped, custom-tailored on Savile Row. He stopped at the foot of the bed, creating distance. I waited. I waited for the question any normal parent would ask. Are you okay? Does it hurt? Who did this? Frank sighed, a sound of immense inconvenience. He didn't look at my eyes. He didn't look at the purple and black bruising that strangled my throat. Instead, he looked at his left wrist. He stared at the face of his Rolex Submariner, tapping the crystal face as if checking how much time this little detour was costing him. You really did a number on him, Esther, Frank said. I blinked. I thought I had misheard. What? I rasped. Julian, Frank said, finally looking up but looking over my head at the heart monitor. He's a wreck. He's been hyperventilating for hours. He's completely traumatized. You really scared him. The breath caught in my chest. I scared him. I was the one with crushed cartilage. I was the one who had been 12 seconds away from the morgue. He tried to kill me. I managed to choke out. Oh, stop it, my mother snapped. It wasn't a scream. It was a high-pitched whine of annoyance. She pulled a silk handkerchief from her purse and dabbed at her dry eyes. Stop being so dramatic, Esther. It's always the drama with you. She walked to the side of the bed, looming over me. He is weeks away from the bar exam. Do you have any idea the pressure he is under, the stress? And then you go and provoke him like that? You know he has a temper when he's anxious. You should have just given him what he needed. He wanted $50,000 for gambling, I whispered. So? Frank cut in, his voice hard. We have the money. That's not the point. The point is that you backed him into a corner. You triggered him. I lay there, frozen. This wasn't just denial. This was gaslighting tailored to the level of an art form. In their narrative, my throat had assaulted Julian's belt. Frank walked around to the side table. He didn't sit down. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the one thing he believed could fix any problem in Western civilization, his checkbook. The leather cover creaked as he opened it. He pulled a gold fountain pen from his pocket. The scratching of the nib on the paper sounded deafening in the quiet room. We need to put this behind us, Frank said, his tone shifting to a business negotiation. We have a strategy. Miller has already filed the preliminary report as an accidental injury. You tripped over some server cables in your office and fell neck first onto a blunt object. He ripped the check out. He held it between two fingers, waving it slightly like he was offering a treat to a dog. I know you're drowning in those student loans, Frank said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. 50,000, right? Plus interest? That's a heavy weight for a girl your age. He placed the check on the bedside table, right next to my water cup. I'm prepared to wipe that debt clean today, Frank continued. And your mother and I have been talking. That guest cottage is too small. We found a lovely condo in Stamford. 2 bedrooms, secure building. We'll put the down payment and the first year of mortgage in your name. My mother nodded eagerly, sniffing. It has a balcony, Esther. You'd love it. You can start fresh, away from the main house. All we need, Frank said, capping his pen with a sharp click, is for you to sign the affidavit confirming the accident. No police, no press, no ruined careers. We stay a family. I stared at the check. It was face up. The number was written in Frank's jagged, aggressive handwriting. It was enough money to change the life of the old Esther. It was freedom from the debt that had shackled me since I was 18. But as I looked at that piece of paper, something inside me snapped. Not like a bone, but like a lock falling into place. For 30 years, I had craved their approval. I had wanted them to love me. I had taken the insults, the neglect, the IT girl jokes, just hoping that one day they would see me. Now, they saw me. And they had put a price tag on my life. To them, my breath, my voice, and my dignity were worth exactly the price of a mid-range condo and a student loan payoff. They weren't my parents. They were targets. They were hostiles. I looked up at Frank. For the first time, he met my eyes. He looked expectant, arrogant, waiting for the gratitude. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the water in his face. That's what a daughter would do. An agent does something else. She secures the perimeter. I needed them to leave. I needed them to think they had won, so they would lower their guard. I took a slow, painful breath. I let my eyes droop, feigning exhaustion. I looked at the check, then back at Frank, and I nodded. A slow, weak nod. Frank let out a breath he had been holding. His shoulders dropped. He smiled. Not a warm smile, but the smile of a CEO who just closed a merger. Good girl, he said. He patted my leg through the blanket. It made my skin crawl. I knew you were smart. I'll have the lawyers draft the papers tomorrow. Rest up, darling, my mother said, her voice suddenly bright and chipper. She didn't kiss me. She just patted her hair in the mirror. We'll take care of everything. They turned and walked out. Frank checked his watch again as he crossed the threshold. The door clicked shut. I was alone with the check. I reached out with a trembling hand, picked up the check, and held it up to the light. I wasn't admiring the money. I was looking at the signature. Proof of the bribe. Proof of the conspiracy to obstruct justice. I crumpled it in my fist. If you believe that justice should never be for sale and that some lines can never be uncrossed, hit the like button right now. Comment "not for sale" below if you would have torn that check up too. I reached for the call button to summon Elena. The deal was done, but not the one Frank thought he made. The nurse looked at me like I was insane. She tapped the clipboard with an aggressive manicured fingernail. Ms. Gill, you are leaving against medical advice, she said, her voice stern. You have significant laryngeal trauma. If that swelling increases, you could suffocate in your sleep. I cannot legally stop you, but I am telling you, this is a mistake. I looked at her. She was doing her job. She was trying to protect me. It was more than my mother had done in 30 years. I appreciate it, I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel grinding in a mixer. But I'm not safe here. I signed the AMA form. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but my grip was steady. I walked out of the hospital room, bypassing the elevators where Frank might still be lingering in the lobby. I took the service stairs. With every step, pain shot up my spine, white hot and blinding. But I didn't stop. I welcomed the pain. It was a reminder that I was alive. It was a reminder of what I had to do. Outside, the air was cold. I ripped the plastic hospital wristband off my arm and tossed it into a trash can. There is a quote by Theodore Roosevelt that Frank used to love quoting at dinner parties, usually to justify his ruthless business deals. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. Frank thought he was the man in the arena. He thought I was just the spectator, the critic, the help. I stood on the curb, waiting for my Uber. I touched the plastic collar around my neck. My face was marred, not by dust, but by bruises. I was in the arena now, and I wasn't just a participant, I was the gladiator. I didn't enter home into the Uber app. I entered an address for a nondescript office park in Northern Virginia, about 40 minutes away. To the public, it was a logistics consulting firm. To those with the right clearance, it was a DOJ black site, a secure off-site facility used for sensitive operations. As the car merged onto the highway, I pulled out my burner phone, the one I kept for emergencies, and dialed a number I knew by heart. Miller. The voice answered on the first ring. Gruff, alert. Sir, I said. It's Jill. There was a pause. He must have heard the damage in my voice immediately. Esther, you sound like you gargled razor blades. Where are you? I'm en route to Site B, I said. I need to activate the witness security protocol. Immediate extraction and protection. Who is the threat? Miller asked instantly. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor told me he was already standing up. Cartel? The trafficking ring from last month? No, sir, I took a breath. The threat is my family. When I walked into the secure facility, the hum of activity died instantly. The bullpen was filled with agents, men and women I'd worked with for 5 years. They were hardened professionals who hunted terrorists and serial killers. They didn't rattle easily. But as I walked through the glass doors, wearing a hoodie stained with dried blood and a medical neck brace, they froze. Miller came out of his office. He was a man of few emotions, a Vietnam vet who had seen everything. He stopped 3 feet away from me. His eyes went to the brace, then to the dark purple bruising blossoming along my jawline. His face didn't soften. It hardened into stone. Who? Miller asked. Just one word. My brother, I said. Julian Gill, and my stepfather, Frank, is covering it up. I handed him the USB drive Elena had returned to me. It's all on here: attempted murder, obstruction of justice, witness tampering. Miller took the drive. He didn't plug it in immediately. He looked around the room. Listen up, Miller barked. Agent Gill is under level 1 protection effective immediately. Johnson, get a TAC team on rotation. I want eyes on the Gill residence in Greenwich. I want to know when they eat, when they sleep, and when they take a piss. Nobody touches her again. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. The response was a collective roar. I felt a lump form in my throat, unrelated to the injury. This was the difference between blood and bond. My blood relatives had offered me a condo to shut up. My colleagues were ready to go to war for me. Miller guided me into a conference room where a man in a sharp suit was already waiting. It was David Ross, a federal prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office. I saw the preliminary file you sent over from the car, Ross said, not wasting time on pleasantries. Local PD filed it as a domestic dispute? Yes, I said, sinking into a chair. Officer Miller, he's a friend of the family. Ross scoffed, opening a leather folder. Well, Officer Miller is about to have a very bad day, because this isn't a domestic dispute anymore. He slid a document across the table toward me. Under 18 U.S. Code, Section 111, Ross recited, his voice calm and lethal. Forcibly assaulting, resisting, or impeding a federal officer while engaged in the performance of official duties is a federal crime. Since you were technically on call and securing federal evidence when he attacked you to destroy said evidence, we aren't charging him with simple assault. I looked at the document. It wasn't a restraining order. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a federal indictment. We are charging Julian Gill with attempted murder of a federal agent, Ross said. And we are charging Frank Gill with obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact. What about jurisdiction? I asked, my analyst brain still working. Greenwich police will fight it. Miller leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. Let them fight. We are the Department of Justice. We don't ask for permission. We take jurisdiction. Ross pulled out a pen. The magistrate judge is on standby. He's seen the video. He called it chilling. He's ready to sign. I looked at the paperwork. For years, I'd been afraid of Frank's lawyers. I'd been afraid of his money, his connections, his ability to make problems disappear. But looking around this room, the secure walls, the armed agents outside, the federal seal on the wall, I realized how small Frank's world really was. Frank played golf with the local police captain. I hunted monsters with the United States government. Sign it, I whispered. Ross signed the bottom of the warrant. The scratch of his pen was loud in the quiet room. It was the sound of a hammer dropping. Miller looked at me. We pick him up tomorrow. How do you want to handle it? I thought about the country club. I thought about the BMW. I thought about Julian's arrogance, his belief that he was untouchable because he was a golden son. Tomorrow is Wednesday, I said, a cold calm settling over me. Wednesday is Julian's golf day. He tees off at 9 a.m. I looked up at Miller. Don't take him at the house, I said. Take him on the first tee, in front of everyone. Miller nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. Done. The hunt was on. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the prey. The unspoken rule of the Greenwich Country Club is silence. Absolute, reverent silence, especially on the first tee box at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. Julian stood at the tee, testing the weight of his $1,000 titanium driver. He was wearing pristine white slacks and a pastel pink polo shirt, the uniform of the leisure class. Around him stood 3 business associates, men who were there to curry favor with Frank, and by extension, with the golden son. 4, Julian joked as he took a practice swing, slicing the air with an arrogant whoosh. I'm telling you, boys, the merger is a done deal. My old man has the regulators in his pocket. He stepped up to the ball, wiggling his hips, preparing to drive. The morning was perfect. The birds were singing. The grass was manicured to the millimeter. Then, the world exploded. It wasn't a bomb. It was the screech of heavy-duty tires tearing across the sacred Bermuda grass. Julian froze in mid-backswing. The group turned to look down the fairway. 2 black Chevrolet Suburbans were barreling across the green, kicking up clods of dirt and grass, heading straight for the tee box. These weren't the polite white sedans of the local Greenwich police. These were government-issue assault vehicles. The SUVs skidded to a halt 10 yards from the tee. The doors flew open before the wheels stopped spinning. Federal agents, a voice boomed. Drop the club, hands in the air. 6 figures jumped out. They weren't wearing standard uniforms. They were wearing navy blue windbreakers with 3 yellow letters emblazoned on the back. FBI. Julian didn't drop the club. He stood there, mouth agape, looking like a child whose toy had just been snatched away. What the hell is this? Julian screamed, his voice cracking. You're ruining the green. Do you have any idea how much membership costs here? Agent Johnson, the tactical lead Miller had assigned, didn't care about the grass. He closed the distance in 3 strides, grabbed Julian's arm, and spun him around. Julian Gill, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of a federal officer, Johnson announced, his voice carrying across the silent course. He kicked Julian's legs apart and slammed him against the hood of the hot SUV. The driver dropped from Julian's hand, clattering onto the asphalt cart path. Murder! Julian shouted as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked onto his wrists. You're crazy! It was a family argument. Get your hands off me. The club members on the patio were standing up, phones out, filming. The waiters stopped serving mimosas. The golden sun was getting the perp walk of the century. As Johnson shoved him into the back of the SUV, pushing his head down so he wouldn't bump it, Julian leaned out, his face red with humiliation and rage. Do you know who my father is? He screamed. spit flying from his lips. My father will sue you. He'll sue the whole damn department. You're done. You hear me? You're done. The door slammed shut, cutting off his tantrum. The SUVs peeled out, leaving deep, muddy tire tracks on the pristine fairway. A scar that money wouldn't fix anytime soon. Frank Gill didn't go to the holding cell. He went to Midtown Manhattan. The offices of Sterling & Associates were located on the 45th floor of a glass tower overlooking Central Park. The carpet was so thick it felt like walking on moss. The air smelled of old leather and billable hours. Frank sat across from Arthur Sterling. Sterling was known in New York legal circles as the Shark. He didn't defend innocent people. He defended rich people. He charged $1,200 an hour, and he was worth every penny if you wanted to bury a body. Metaphorically speaking. It's a mess, Arthur, Frank said, pacing the office. He looked older today. The facade was cracking. The feds picked him up. They're charging him with attempted murder. And something about a federal officer? It's insanity. Sterling leaned back in his Eames chair, steepling his fingers. He was a small man with eyes like polished flint. It's not insanity, Frank. It's a strategy, Sterling said smoothly. If your stepdaughter is claiming to be an agent, she's delusional. That's our angle. She works in IT, Frank spat. She fixes servers. She's always been a bit off. Quiet. Weird. Perfect, Sterling smiled. It was a cold, reptilian smile. We don't fight the physical evidence yet. We fight her character. We paint a picture for the jury. Esther is the jealous, unstable stepsister. She's 32, unmarried, low income, living in a guest cottage while her successful brother drives a BMW. She resents him. She snapped. She attacked him. He defended himself. And now she's inventing this elaborate spy fantasy to ruin him. Frank stopped pacing. He nodded slowly. She has been under a lot of stress. My wife says Esther has always been fragile. Exactly. Sterling pulled a legal pad forward. We file a motion for a psychiatric evaluation. We leak it to the press that she has a history of mental instability. By the time this goes to trial, no jury will believe a word she says. We'll make her look like a hysterical woman who watched too many crime shows. Do whatever it takes. Frank pulled out his checkbook, the same one Esther had rejected. I want her discredited. I want her destroyed. 40 miles away, inside the windowless war room of the DOJ safe site, the atmosphere was very different. There were no leather chairs, just metal tables, cold coffee, and the hum of hard drives. Elena paced the room, furious. She had just gotten off the phone with a contact at the courthouse. They're going to smear you, Esther, Elena said, slamming her phone down on the table. Sterling just filed a motion. They're claiming you're delusional. They're saying the federal agent claim is a symptom of psychosis. They're going to drag your name through the mud. I sat at the main terminal, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wasn't pacing. I wasn't angry. I was in the zone. Let them, I said quietly. Elena stopped. What? Esther, we need to release your service record. We need to show them the director's commendations. We need to prove who you are right now. No. I turned to look at her. If we release my file now, Sterling will pivot. He'll claim self-defense. He'll claim the video is doctored. He'll find another angle. I turned back to the screen. Rows of hexadecimal code cascaded down the monitor like green rain. We are going to play the Trojan horse, I said. Let them walk into court thinking I'm the crazy, jealous IT girl. Let Frank lie under oath. Let Julian lie. Let them build their entire defense on the idea that I am a nobody. And then, Elena asked. And then, I typed a command, executing a script that verified the metadata of the assault video. We dropped the hammer. Perjury is a felony, Elena. If they lie to a federal judge, they don't just lose the case. They go to prison. I focused back on my work. I wasn't preparing a victim impact statement. I wasn't writing a diary about my feelings. I was compiling the forensic report. I pulled up the metadata of the video file. Creation date, Tuesday, 11:52 p.m. Device ID, server room. CAM. 4. Hash value, matches, DOJ vault copy. I layered in the audio analysis, isolating the sound of the belt snapping, the specific frequency of Julian's voice. I built a digital fortress that no lawyer, no matter how expensive, could breach. Frank thought he could buy a narrative. He thought he could pay a man in a nice suit to tell a story about a crazy girl. He forgot that in my world, stories don't matter. Only data matters. And the data was screaming for blood. The federal courthouse in D.C. smells different from a hospital. It smells of old mahogany, floor wax, and the heavy, suffocating weight of judgment. I sat at the prosecution table next to Elena. My neck was still in the brace, a stark white reminder against my dark blazer. Across the aisle, at the defense table, sat Julian. He wasn't wearing his jail jumpsuit. Frank had already pulled strings to get him into a crisp charcoal suit. He looked well-rested. He looked like he was attending a board meeting, not a bail hearing. Frank sat in the front row of the gallery, his legs crossed, looking bored. He offered me a small, pitying smile when I walked in. It was the smile of a man who knew the game was rigged. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Magistrate Judge Vance swept in. He was an older man with bushy gray eyebrows and a reputation for being tough on violent crime, but tougher on procedure. Arthur Sterling, Frank's $1,000-an-hour shark, stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a smooth, practiced motion. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at the press gallery behind us. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice baritone and smooth like aged whiskey. "The defense moves to dismiss the video evidence submitted by the prosecution. Furthermore, we request immediate bail for my client, Mr. Gill, who is a victim of a malicious fabrication." Judge Vance peered over his glasses. "Fabrication, Mr. Sterling? The prosecution has submitted a video that appears to show your client strangling the victim with a belt." "Appears is the key word, Your Honor." Sterling walked toward the center of the room. He pointed a finger at me. "We live in a new era, an era where reality can be bent by code. We all know that Miss Gill works in computers. She is a low-level technician who harbors deep-seated resentment toward her successful brother." He paused for effect, turning to look at Frank, then back to the judge. "Ms. Gill is 32, unmarried, financially unstable, and living in her parents' guest house. She is jealous of Julian's success. She has a history of, let's call it, imaginative episodes. We contend that the video in question is a deepfake, a computer-generated fabrication created by a jealous sister using AI technology to frame the golden boy of the family." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The AI defense. It was the trendy new strategy for the guilty. "This video," Sterling continued, his voice rising, "is nothing more than a high-tech cartoon. It is inadmissible. And without it, all you have is the word of a disturbed woman against a Yale law graduate." Judge Vance looked at the screen where the paused video of Julian was displayed. He frowned. He was from a generation of typewriters. Deepfakes were a boogeyman he didn't quite understand. "This is a serious claim, Mr. Sterling," the judge said. "If the authenticity of the evidence is in question, I cannot deny bail. We will need an independent forensic analysis. That could take weeks." Frank smirked. I saw it. It was a tiny twitch of his lip. He leaned over and whispered something to Julian. Julian turned to me, his eyes cold and mocking. "You lose," his eyes said. "We always win." Sterling looked triumphant. "Exactly, Your Honor. We request—" "Objection." Elena stood up. Her voice cut through Sterling's monologue like a knife. "Ms. Ramirez," the judge sighed. "Mr. Sterling has raised a valid technical concern. Unless you have a forensic expert in your pocket who can verify this footage right now, I'm inclined to grant bail pending investigation." Elena didn't flinch. She smiled. "We don't need to hire an outside expert, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Agent Esther Gill to the stand." Sterling laughed. "Object. The victim cannot be the expert witness. She's a computer repair girl, for God's sake." "Actually," Elena said, her voice dropping an octave, deadly serious, "she isn't." I stood up. The pain in my neck flared, but I pushed it down. I walked to the witness box. I didn't look at Julian. I didn't look at Frank. I kept my eyes on the judge. I placed my hand on the Bible. I do. I sat down. I reached into my blazer pocket. I didn't pull out a tissue. I pulled out my badge, the gold shield of the Department of Justice, and set it on the wooden ledge with a heavy metallic clack. Sterling stopped laughing. Frank sat up straighter. State your name and occupation for the record, Elena asked. I leaned into the microphone. My voice was raspy, damaged, but it filled the room. My name is Esther Gill. I am a senior forensic analyst for the Department of Justice Cyber Crimes Division. My badge number is 894 Alpha. I specialize in digital counterterrorism and the authentication of manipulated media. The silence that followed was absolute. Sterling looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Frank's face went from arrogant to ashen gray in the span of 2 seconds. Agent Gill, Elena continued, can you address the defense's claim that this video is a deepfake? I can, I said. I opened the folder I had prepared. I wrote the DOJ's standard protocol for detecting generative adversarial networks, or deepfakes, 2 years ago. I literally wrote the book on it. I pointed to the large monitor on the wall. Please play the video at 0.2 speed. The video played, slow motion. Stop at frame 402, I commanded. The image froze on Julian's face, mid-scream, sweat dripping down his temple. Mr. Sterling claims this is AI, I said, turning to the jury box. AI struggles with 3 things: subdermal blood flow, inconsistent lighting on reflective surfaces, and chaotic motion blur. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, if you look at the reflection in the buckle of the Hermes belt, you can see the distorted reflection of the server rack lights. The vector of that reflection matches the physical geometry of the room perfectly. An AI rendering would smooth that out. I gestured to Julian's face on the screen. Furthermore, I ran a pulse wave analysis on the pixels of the subject's forehead. You can see the subtle color shift of oxygenated blood pumping at 140 beats per minute. That is a human heart rate in a state of extreme fight or flight. No generator on the market can fake that biological signature. I turned to look at Arthur Sterling. The shark was drowning. This video has a SHA-256 hash value that was locked into the DOJ secure vault 12 seconds after the incident, I said. The chain of custody is unbroken. The metadata is pristine. I closed the folder. The sound echoed in the silent room. This is not a deepfake, Your Honor, I said. I turned my head slowly. I looked past Julian, who was trembling. I looked past Sterling, who was frantically shuffling papers. I looked straight at Frank in the front row. Frank looked small. For the first time in my life, the giant who controlled the money, the cars, and the narrative looked absolutely terrified. He realized that the invisible girl had been watching him the whole time. I held his gaze. It is not a simulation, I said. It is a verdict. Judge Vance stared at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the defense table with disgust. Mr. Sterling, the judge's voice was like gravel. Your motion to dismiss is denied, and considering the violent nature of the crime and the overwhelming evidence presented by Agent Gill, bail is denied. The gavel banged. Remanded the defendant to custody. 2 marshals stepped forward. They grabbed Julian by the arms. He didn't scream this time. He didn't threaten to sue. He looked at Frank, begging for help. But Frank didn't move. He sat frozen, staring at the badge on the witness stand, realizing that all the money in the world couldn't buy his way out of this room. The sound of a federal plea agreement being signed isn't a bang. It's a scratch. A dry, pathetic scratching of a ballpoint pen against cheap government paper that signals the end of a life. 2 weeks had passed since the bail hearing. 2 weeks of Arthur Sterling, the shark, thrashing in the water, trying to find a loophole. But there were no loopholes. The metadata I had provided was a steel cage. The forensic evidence was airtight. We were in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom holding cells. It smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Julian sat at the metal table. The charcoal suit he had worn at the hearing was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that washed out his pale, terrified complexion. He looked smaller. The golden sun, the rower, the future master of the universe, had shrunk. 15 years, Julian whispered, staring at the document. 15 years, Arthur. You said you could get it down to 5. You said I could go to a camp. It's the best we can do, Julian, Sterling said, closing his briefcase. He sounded bored. He had already cashed Frank's retainer check. The outcome didn't matter to him anymore. If we go to trial, Agent Gill testifies, the jury sees the video again. The judge is looking at 25 years, minimum. Federal sentencing guidelines are mandatory. There is no parole in the federal system. You serve 85% of your time. But that's my whole life, Julian's voice cracked. Tears, hot and snotty, began to stream down his face. I'll be 50 when I get out. 50. He looked up at the glass partition where Frank and my mother were watching from the other side. They couldn't hear him, but they could see him. Julian didn't look at them with love. He looked at them with a sudden, venomous hatred. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling his shackles. He promised, Julian screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Frank through the glass. He told me he could fix anything. He lied. Look at him. He's just standing there. Sign it, Julian, Sterling said coldly. Julian signed. He wept openly, his shoulders heaving, all dignity gone. He wasn't a man taking responsibility. He was a spoiled child realizing that the credit card had finally been declined. The U.S. Marshals didn't care about his tears. They hauled him up by his armpits. Let's go, the lead marshal said. They led him out into the hallway to transport him to the van. As the heavy doors swung open, the noise of the courthouse rushed in. I was standing near the elevators with Elena and Agent Miller. I had traded my neck brace for a silk scarf, though the bruises underneath were still fading from purple to yellow. I watched them walk Julian past his parents. Mom! Dad! Julian wailed, twisting in the marshal's grip. My mother brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. But she didn't reach out for him. She shrank back against the marble wall, terrified that a reporter might snap a photo of her touching a convict. Frank didn't even look at Julian. He was staring at the floor, his face a mask of red-hot fury. And just like that, Julian was gone. The elevator doors slid shut, severing the golden sun from the world of country clubs and convertibles forever. The hallway was silent for a moment. Then Frank looked up. He saw me. The sight of me, standing tall, calm, surrounded by federal agents, seemed to snap something inside his brain. The veneer of the civilized CEO vanished. The beast that lived beneath the tailored suits lunged forward. Frank charged down the hallway. You! He roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Are you happy now? Are you satisfied? Elena stepped forward, her lawyer instincts kicking in, ready to verbally intercept him. Agent Miller's hand went to his holster, his eyes narrowing. But Frank ignored them. He stopped 5 feet from me, breathing heavily, his face contorted into a rictus of hate. You ungrateful little traitor, Frank spat, pointing a shaking finger at my face. We gave you a home. We put clothes on your back. And this is how you repay us. You destroyed this family. You ruined his life over a bruise. A bruise. My mother was behind him, her eyes cold and hard. I hope you're proud of yourself, Esther, she hissed. Everyone in Greenwich is talking. We can't even show our faces at the club. You've humiliated us. That's all you care about, Elena shouted, stepping in front of me. Your reputation? Your son almost killed her, and you're worried about the damn country club? She provoked him, Frank screamed, stepping closer, his fists clenched at his sides. She's always been jealous of him. She's a cancer in this family. You are dead to us, do you hear me? Dead! Frank looked like he was about to lunge. Miller took a step forward to tackle him. But I moved first. I didn't step back. I didn't flinch. I didn't shout. I stepped out from behind Elena. I looked Frank directly in the eyes, and I raised my right hand. I held it up, palm facing out, fingers pressed tight together, thumb tucked in. It wasn't a wave. It wasn't a casual gesture. It was the universal, tactical signal used by law enforcement and military personnel across the globe. Stop. The motion was sharp, precise, and absolute. Frank froze. It wasn't just the hand. It was the energy behind it. For 30 years, he had looked at me and seen a scared little girl he could bully. A girl who would shrink, apologize, and beg for approval. But the woman standing in front of him now wasn't that girl. The woman in front of him was an agent who had directed drone strikes and hunted cartels. The eyes staring back at him were cold, dead, and utterly unafraid. I held the pose. I held his gaze. I didn't blink. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Frank's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked at my hand, then at my eyes, and for the first time, he saw the wall he couldn't break. He realized that if he took one more step, if he said one more word, the consequences would be catastrophic. He faltered. He took a half step back. The bully had met the wall. I didn't say, "It's over." I didn't say goodbye. Those words implied a relationship, a conversation. We didn't have a relationship anymore. We were strangers. I lowered my hand slowly. I adjusted the lapel of my blazer. I turned to Elena and Miller. "We're done here," I said. My voice was calm, steady, barely above a whisper. I turned my back on Frank and my mother. I started walking toward the exit. "Esther!" Frank yelled after me, his voice cracking, sounding desperate and small in the vast hallway. "Don't you walk away from me, I'm speaking to you." I kept walking. Click, click, click. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was rhythmic, precise, and final. I didn't speed up. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back to see them standing there in the ruins of the life they had built on lies. I walked through the double doors and out into the bright, blinding sunlight of Washington, D.C. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like ozone and exhaust and cherry blossoms. It tasted like freedom. The placard on the door of my new office didn't just say Esther Gill. It read, "Unit Chief Esther Gill, Domestic Threat Digital Response." It had been 6 months since the trial. 6 months since Julian traded his tailored suits for a federal jumpsuit, and 6 months since I walked away from Frank in that marble hallway. My new office at the DOJ wasn't in the sub-basement anymore. It had windows. Real windows that looked out over Pennsylvania Avenue. But I didn't spend much time looking at the view. I was too busy building something that hadn't existed before. After the trial, Director Miller had given me a blank check. "You exposed a gap in the system, Jill," he had said. "We protect politicians from cyber threats. We protect banks. But we don't protect the women who are being terrorized in their own homes by the people who claim to love them." So, I built the unit. We weren't chasing international terrorists anymore. We were chasing the abusers who used spyware to track their wives, the ex-boyfriends who revenge-posted private photos, and the stalkers who hid behind VPNs. Technically, as a unit chief, I was supposed to be behind a desk, managing budgets and personnel. But today, I was in the field. I parked my government-issue SUV in front of a small garden apartment complex in Arlington, Virginia. I grabbed my toolkit and walked up to apartment 4B. Sarah opened the door before I could knock. She was 22, roughly the same age I was when I first realized my family hated me. She was trembling, her eyes darting to the parking lot behind me. "Did you see a blue Ford truck?" she whispered. "He drives by sometimes. He says he knows when I turn the lights off." I checked the perimeter, Sarah. "No blue truck," I said, my voice soft but firm. "And after today, it won't matter if he drives by. We'll see him before he even turns the corner." For the next hour, I didn't act like a federal boss. I acted like the technician Frank had mocked. I installed micro cameras in the door frame. I set up a secure, encrypted router that masked her IP address. I scrubbed her phone of the tracking software her ex-boyfriend had installed. When I was finished, I handed her a tablet. It showed a crisp, high-definition feed of her front door, her back window, and the parking lot. "This feed goes to a secure cloud server," I explained, pointing to the screen, "and it also pings directly to my office. If he steps foot on this property, facial recognition will flag him, and local PD will be dispatched within 3 minutes." Sarah stared at the screen, clutching the tablet like a lifeline. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she choked out. "My dad. He told me I was being paranoid. He said I was imagining things." I felt a phantom ache in my neck, a ghost of the pain from 6 months ago. I knew that feeling, the feeling of being gaslit until you question your own sanity. I reached out and placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You are not paranoid, Sarah," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "You were in danger. But you aren't anymore. You are protected." She exhaled, a long, shuddering breath of relief that she had probably been holding for months. That sound was better than any paycheck. It was the sound of a life being given back. That evening, I returned to my new apartment in the Navy Yard district. It was a far cry from the guest cottage in Greenwich. It was a high-rise with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Potomac River. It was modern, clean, and most importantly, it was mine. Paid for with my salary, secured by my own code. I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat on the beige sofa, watching the lights of the city reflect off the water. The silence here wasn't heavy or oppressive, it was peaceful. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at it. The caller ID didn't show a name, just a blocked number. But I knew who it was. They had been trying to reach me from burner phones and hotel lines for weeks. A voicemail icon popped up. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen. Part of me, the old Esther, the daughter who just wanted to be loved, wanted to delete it without listening. But the new Esther, the unit chief, needed to confirm the intel. I pressed play. "Esther." It was my mother's voice. She sounded older, frail. But the manipulation was still there, woven into the timbre of her voice like a poison thread. "It's your mother. Please, pick up. We're staying at a hotel in the city. The bank seized the house in Greenwich, Esther. Frank is having heart palpitations. And Julian, oh God, Julian is having such a hard time in that place. He's losing weight." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "We are a family, Esther. Families forgive. We're all you have. Please, just call us. We can fix this. We can start over." The message ended. I sat there, holding the warm mug of tea. I waited for the guilt to come. I waited for that familiar, crushing weight in my chest, the obligation to fix their mess, to be the dutiful daughter. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a profound sense of clarity. "We're all you have," she had said. I looked around my apartment. I thought about Elena, who was coming over for dinner tomorrow. I thought about Director Miller, who trusted me with millions of dollars in resources. I thought about Sarah, who was sleeping safely tonight because of me. I had a family. I had a purpose. My biological family didn't want forgiveness. They wanted a host. They wanted someone to carry their shame so they didn't have to. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt done. I tapped the screen. I didn't save the message. I hit delete. Then, I went into the call settings. I selected the number. My finger hovered over the red text for a split second, acknowledging the finality of the act. Block caller. I set the phone down, face down. I stood up and walked to the window. The Washington Monument glowed in the distance, a beacon of white stone against the dark sky. There is a verse in the Bible, Luke 8:17, that had kept me sane during those long years in the dark. "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." For a long time, I thought that verse was a threat, a warning that my secrets would be found out. But now I realized it was a promise. God hadn't ignored me when I was the invisible girl in the guest cottage. He was hiding me. He was preparing me. He was forging me in the dark so that when the time was right, I could bring the truth into the light. I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I wasn't the victim. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, looking out over the city I'd sworn to protect. I was no longer invisible. I was watching. My case file is officially closed, but the mission continues. I shared my journey because too many of you feel invisible, undervalued by those who should love you most. But remember, your silence isn't weakness. Your worth never depends on their approval. If my victory sparked hope today, type, "I am worthy" in the comments. It's a small step that changes everything. For those craving real justice, welcome to the ultimate network of military revenge. If you want to experience more gripping military revenge stories where underdogs rise and predators become the prey, hit that subscribe button right now. Welcome to the Resistance. You are no longer alone.